this is going to go to come up panelist.
And then I'm gonna join
Okay.
and share my screen.
Perfect. And I want to mute this tab.
Okay, now can you guys hear me?
Yes. Hi, Larry. How's it
Good.
going?
It's going good. How are you guys? Hey, Shay,
Hey Larry, good to see you.
too.
Thanks for joining us, Larry.
I'm glad to. This is neat. I'm living vicariously through you. I know how nice the weather is out there because it's nice here too. So,
Oh, good. Okay. Let's see. I'll just share my screen and then I'll get us started. Okay, there we go. Awesome. Well, let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our third Land Use Code learning session. The goal of this series is to create a brief and digestible educational opportunity for community members to learn about what goes into the Land Use Code and how it shapes our community. The Land Use Code is a technical document, but if developed correctly, can play a vital role in guiding the physical, social, and economic development of Silverton in a manner that promotes the goals of the master plan. So our hope is to create a shared language and understanding when it comes to widespread community engagement for the Land Use Code update to maximize the diversity of participants. So today we will be discussing the role of the Land Use Code in historic preservation. Tonight we will cover Silverton's historic districts. Sorry, just getting my notes. Larry Lucas from DOLA and Colorado Main Streets is here to introduce some best practices. And then we will have an update on the land use draft from Shay and from the Land Use Code update team. In 1961, the Silverton Historic District was designated a national and state historic landmark. The Silverton Historic District includes the town of Silverton, the Mayflower Mill, and the Hillside Cemetery. This designation opened up funding opportunities for the town and its property owners. Since the designation, the Grand Imperial Hotel and the Brown Bear Cafe have received preservation tax credits for their renovations. This designation also comes with the responsibility to preserve the historic character. So how does the town take on the responsibility of historic preservation? One way is through the Land Use Code, which sets regulatory standards for new construction, exterior renovation, and the demolition within the Historic Overlay District and the Architectural Review Overlay District. We also have historic guidelines, which explain these standards by providing examples, by providing the context for the districts as well as examples. So, going back here. So the Land Use Code and the historic guidelines regulate development within Silverton's Architectural Review Overlay Zone, as well as Silverton's Historic Overlay Zone. So what does that mean for property owners within those zones? If a property owner within those zones is proposing new construction, exterior renovation, viewable by the public, or demolition of a structure 50 years old, or 1,000 square feet or more, they are required to go through the land use application procedure. And we discussed this during the first land use code learning session. So if you want more information, you can go back and review that session. But basically what this means is an applicant will submit a land use application. And traditionally those come with a site plan, elevations, materials, historic photographs, and a fee. And this is then reviewed by the Historic Review Committee as well as the Board of Trustees before we can issue a building permit. So there's always room for improvement. And this land use code update provides a great opportunity for that. So through the land use code, we have an update process. We've identified a few issues within our current process. And those are that we have vague regulatory standards, which sometimes make it difficult for the Historic Review Committee and Board of Trustees to objectively review an application. Our code language is sometimes unclear. Our design guidelines are not always applicable to all development types and could be more user-friendly. Right now, our process requires that both minor and major renovations are subject to the same review process. And this occasionally creates unnecessarily long procedures for some applicants. But we are certainly working to improve this. The 2022 Compass Master Plan calls for updating land use standards while maintaining historic character and developing systems for property owners by creating more efficient and predictable development standards and a review process. So that is our guiding principle as we go through this land use code update. And through the update, we also are working towards achieving certified local government status. So how do we do that? Now I'll hand it over to Larry Lucas to introduce himself and to present some historic preservation best practices.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I was honored to be asked to talk with you guys tonight. I'm the Main Street architect for the Colorado Main Street program. Shay had a part in forming that program not too many years ago. I've been a Main Street architect for about 13 years though. I was in Oklahoma prior to coming to DOLA 6 years ago, and I've really enjoyed seeing the state. You guys are one of our newer programs, just becoming a Main Street, an official Main Street program last year. And we're super glad that you took that step. And, we're here to essentially help you guys through the process of practicing good preservation, mainly in your historic commercial district. This is what we call Main Street. So, okay, next slide. And then next slide. I work with, so my agency is the Department of Local Affairs. That's where Main Street is based out of. And we're in the Division of Local Government. So we work directly with, your town government. This is the rest of the team. Gail, our coordinator, Jessica, she does our financial part. And then Tracy, she's kind of does everything. So we're a lean, mean team. But okay, next slide. I'm going to lead you through just kind of a quick three-part idea of how really we can do a good job to preserve our Main Street districts. So first off, why do we preserve? It's essentially we want to keep things in use because we know what happens to buildings when they're not in use. They really go downhill quickly. We also want to preserve things for future generations. It's really history that we can touch, and you can really do that in Silverton. So it's cool. Okay, so next slide. So gathering together, that's what we're doing tonight. You guys are doing an incredible job, really just leading the charge, getting the community involved. It's nice to see that you have kind of become a Main Street program. You're pursuing certified local government status. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But really bringing everyone together is really the first thing, and making sure we have a local consensus on practicing good preservation. All right, next slide. And I just overlaid this. This is just a map that I got from one of your locals, Anne, at the Development Authority. She put this together very nicely. And it's essentially showing where the Main Street district is. And you can see that it's Green Street. And I can't read the other one, but it's just parallel to Green Street, that your downtown district. So we're kind of the inside of the historic district, which is inside of your whole town's historic district. All right, so next slide. Well, it's amazing you guys have a National Historic Landmark designation. That's not an easy one to attain. It's much higher than essentially having a National Register listed district. So that's wonderful that you have that in place. The interesting thing about you guys is that you've been a very highly recognized district for a very long time. And I didn't know you had only had a couple of tax credit projects. Well, let's see if we can change that. I think going forward, we're developing a plan, and ideally through the town and then through us and the other state preservation offices, we can actually start moving that forward for your property owners. Starting off though, like just at this beginning phase, if you don't have one already, it's a good time to maybe before things start to change in a positive way, have somebody go out and catalog all the buildings downtown. Get a good front shot, maybe at a little bit at an angle from periodic places down the block, and put together a look at what things look like today. And then later on, when they change, you're going to actually have a nice history of that. And people in further generations are really going to love this point in time that you capture. And part of that also could be getting volunteers, the Main Street organization, to have a building inventory set up. And it could be a simple spreadsheet. It's really up to you guys. We have examples of those if you want to see those, but actually cataloging the space that's unused. Commercial buildings, they used to use a lot of space in the back for goods and merchandise. Well, we don't need that as much anymore with delivery and things. So, what do we do with these underutilized spaces and upper floors sometimes that aren't being used? There's formulas for those things. And then also, conducting a new historic district survey, I think it's probably a good time to do that. I've sort of heard through the grapevine you guys are thinking about doing that, and I would just want to encourage you to continue that way. It might be a good time to update your period of significance, and then maybe just really dig into another level of history that hasn't been really unearthed yet. Okay, next slide. So in terms of surveys, this is just a very quick look. And our partner over at the Certified Local Government program, Lindsay Flewelling, she actually helped me with these definitions a little bit. So essentially, a reconnaissance level is like, here's what the buildings are, here's what you do. A historic context is something that can ride outside of any of the building type surveys, but it's something that should be included in a good, more holistic survey. That you would talk about the area, the time periods, and things. You probably have a lot of this in place, but modern things that have happened since the National Historic Landmark designation should be included in that as well. And then your intensive level is essentially a survey that could include the context study. Also, you're going to dig in really deep on each property. You're going to catalog what it is, what it was, more of a story about that. And I know you probably have some of that information, but again, there's more to the story than maybe has been revealed so far. You're going to talk about architectural style, types of materials, the condition of properties. What's it being used for today? Lots of good things. And this is an example. Through the presentation, I've put up some kind of key examples or resources. And this is one you could access through State Historical Fund because it was funded through them. La Junta is another Main Street community that's doing a lot of good revitalization work, and they just finished a wonderful study. So it'd be good to actually get your hands on a copy of this and check it out. Next slide. And okay, so here's Dr. Lindsay Flewelling's information. This is the book that Main Street actually put together, I believe, when Shay was on staff, in partnership with History Colorado, talking about how does this all work in a Main Street town? How do we become a certified local government? How do we do good preservation at a governmental level? And, Main Street's more about the volunteer and community level too. So it's really this big thing that we can wrap up together, all working together. This is a resource that's online. You can search it, Understanding Certified Local Governments in Colorado. It's a nice read. Next slide. So some common things happen with Main Street. So, funds and financial incentives, there is some good overlap there. They can tend to do things like surveys, there's no cost matching to a survey. Whenever you get one of the CLG grants, they say, here's some money for a survey if you get your application in on time every year. We have different kinds of opportunities. We have consulting services where we could actually do some kind of an analysis for, it could be anything for all-terrain vehicles or something, parking issues, different things like that. We can actually do business, building business inventory type things. There's just a lot of opportunity there that for no money grants that we're set up to provide. We can also provide training sort of like this, but also we can come out in the field and maybe have a charrette, meet with community folks, talk about building design, just whatever we can do to help. And as you can see, there's a pretty good list here, but we'll get into more of this in a little bit further along. Okay, next slide. So the next thing, after we gather, let's protect things. Like, how do we figure that out? And I think that's what we're in the midst of now. You have a lot of this back information started and kind of done to a certain level. Yeah, we could get more information and kind of really, pick our feet up and do a bang up job at this protect using some older information with some newer. But when we get here, my questions are, number one, do you have a property maintenance ordinance in town? It's not just the weeds and trash type ordinance. That should be part of it, but it should also be about things like you can't replace a broken plate glass window with plywood. It has to be like a same material type replacement. If something's really shoddy and it's just needs paint and it's deteriorating, there's even ways that things can be abated and taken care of if you go to that level. And I'm not suggesting you guys do. I know you're a tight-knit community, but I think that sometimes when you have absentee ownership, vacant properties, those things can kind of go together sometimes, and that can be a real problem. And so, in those situations, that's when you can reach out to us for a little bit of guidance. Having a good preservation ordinance, that's part of being a CLG. They will help you set that up. They have so many examples. They actually have written a sample ordinance that you can, take the kitchen sink version, or you can have kind of the baseline level. I would suggest just working with Lindsay and getting set up and, the best that'll work for you guys. You may not need all the bells and whistles in it. It might just be pretty straightforward, and that works just fine. And then also working this all into your permitting and design review process, I think is critical. And at what point actually these get kind of pre-filtered, maybe through someone at the town that knows a lot about preservation to understand the scope of the project so that you know whether or not there might be some hangups as we get through plan review, and really talking to folks right off the bat. And then the standards and guidelines are obviously like what you would use as that person, and the Historic Preservation Commission or Design Review Board. You would use these standards and guidelines that you're going to develop that would actually pave the way for what you see the future of history in Silverton. Next slide. Common issues, we see this everywhere. I mean, there are thousands of Main Street communities across the country. Most towns have them. Most towns have these problems. They're, due to the things that happen with folks moving out of town at certain periods. You guys earlier than a lot of the people moving to suburbia, that caused the Main Street program to actually take force nationally. But it's a really interesting thought, like what happened when buildings became vacant for a while? Like, they're not maintained. Pigeons they get a free hotel. It's great. Well, the buildings actually do suffer, and sometimes catching up that deferred maintenance is a real task. So we can offer some guidance on that. Inappropriate materials. You can see the funny publication on the right. My counterpart in Wisconsin, Joe, wrote this article. It's pretty cool that he found a building that had so many problems with it, at face value. And hey, I have this window in the barn. I know it's not the size of the one downtown that we need, but we can get some daylight in there. So let's frame around it. No, let's keep things classy. Let's keep things authentic and have high integrity. And then also, we talked about ownership conditions and then incompatible development. I think at this time, I say this for every Main Street, you're at a time where you can protect yourself from poor development and things coming in downtown, somebody buying property and building something that just does not fit. So infill development is something you absolutely should have in your preservation ordinance, and really specify things like size, mass, materials, things like that. Okay, next slide. So just speaking on the integrity thing, Main Street architect in West Virginia put this together. And it's just funny, it kind of shows a very traditional simplified design of a building on the left with prism transom glass and storefronts and upper floor windows and a cornice. Well, the one to the right is like, hey, these folks really, they blew out all the bells and whistles on this one. But through a period of disinvestment and not being used to its full capacity, we end up with the air conditioner that drips on your head when you walk in, and then the windows upstairs that are boarded up because we just use that for storage now. Or we cover things with signs and we get the really cool, quote unquote old look with these wood shingle awnings, which is totally uncharacteristic of these towns and what was done. And then obviously like a lawyer or someone moves in and they, I want to go neoclassical with mine. And, this can be protected against if you have good guidelines and a strong ordinance. Next slide. So just a little bit here, and I do want to make sure that this is left with you guys. I'm sure the town will provide copies of this so you can look through at some of these resources. Town of Sidney, Nebraska has a guideline I like. It's just well done. There are many that are well done. Now, I'm not saying this is like the one to go to. I have multiple. I could get you guys lots of different examples if you want. But this was just a nice one that I felt like you ought to look at. We want to make sure that folks understand things in a clear and intelligible way, but they kind of want to get the technology a little bit. They want to understand, why the transom windows may be opened, or why were they even there? Or, what does a double hung window really do? You can take the top part down and the bottom part up. Nobody really does that anymore, but why was that? And why should we still do it? And then, using actual photos from your district that say, hey, this is a good example of something that's intact the way we want it to be. And this is something we want to design around, versus, and you don't have to use your own town because I know it's a small town, but you could find some photos. Maybe we have some poor choices that folks have made with their buildings or maintenance issues or things like that and say, this is not what we're going for. So when people really see that, it really makes design guidelines easier to understand. They get it. They're like, oh, this is what I'm going for. Got it. Okay, next slide. This is your key resource, though. Working with the National Park Service, who essentially holds the register that your National Historic Landmark is listed in. There are 4 treatment paths. Preservation is kind of like, let's keep it going. Let's keep it like it is. We're not going to do much improvement. Rehabilitation is what most of this focuses around, because if you do rehabilitation, you can get tax credit money. And that level actually allows you flexibility to put in a new use into a historic space, maybe making some modifications, bathrooms and whatnot that we need to do to make it legal, but still get tax credits. And then restoration is like, just like it was, we're going to completely restore this. It's maybe a home museum, or it's, everything is as best as we can make it. Reconstruction is when something's been missing and we need to recreate it. And maybe we have a good photo. So we might put an old garage out behind the mansion that was there, and say, oh, that's about where it was and about the size and kind of looked like this, we think. Next slide. Another key resource, and this is out of print, and I'll definitely get you, Lucy, a copy. It's a Main Street resource that was put out as sort of an attempt at some graphical design guidelines that were rather generic. I've actually advised that some towns at some points when there were some poor development choices about to happen, you can see down on the bottom right of the slide there, it's talking about infill development and what that should actually look like. And so I've said, hey, if nothing else, just adopt this simple, 20-page graphic guideline for now as a stopgap if you're seeing this happening, and it'll give you something to go on. It's a neat document. It's worth a read. I think everyone would enjoy this, kind of learning more about the way these buildings functioned and a little bit more about how it worked historically. Okay, next slide. And then, similarly, local regulation, we're talking all about that, and you're making it happen. Getting preservation into your comp plan and actually having that as a component of that. It's good stuff. Something you may think about if you don't already have this is mixed use zoning that would allow potentially rear occupancy residential and second floor occupancy residential. You really need to be using the International Existing Building Code if you're not using that for all of your buildings that are already constructed. It's tricky. It's got 3 different paths. We can help you with that a little bit, help your code official, do our best to get them somewhat educated on that. And then, CLG helps with HP, helps with your ordinance and commission, guidelines, surveys, all of those things. You can actually accomplish that through being a certified local government. Again, Lindsay has so many examples of these kinds of documents, and from each town, and like what the most current one is they have. And then she has grant money that she just loves to give away. So, hope you'll take advantage of that. And then obviously, you guys have to be the tough guys. You guys have to say, I'm real sorry to tell you, your window can't be covered with plywood for more than 60 days. You really need to get that fixed, or we're going to fix it for you, kind of deal. Or not, be as hard-nosed as you have to be in a nice way. And then incentive programs, maybe there's a carrot there. Hey, we've got a facade grant. It's 50-50 matching or 25-75. We can help you with that window. You just need to apply and follow our guidelines and standards when you're doing the work. Next slide. Again, you need to be using this code, particularly for these older buildings. It's much more flexible than just the IBC, the typical new building construction code. This one does take a little training, and you'd be miles ahead if you could get some training for your code officials on the IEBC. It's not super simple to apply some of these code paths. Here's the caveat, though. It falls back in guys like and girls like in my court as a design professional. We're the ones that really will say, we're going to follow a certain path through the IBC, which there are multiple. And this is how we are going to, declare whether or not we need sprinklers in that second floor residential or not. And then it's up to the code official so essentially discerning information and saying, yeah, I agree with you, or no, this doesn't fit what we have written in our code. Please, somebody give me a shout about this and we can talk more about it. It's something that's kind of a passion of mine, and it's really important to doing good work and allowing folks flexibility to get projects done without things that you have to do and that can hurt the building history and pocketbooks. So let me know on that. Next slide. So improving, this is what we're doing now. This is the last part. You guys, all the stuff in bold, you're knocking this out of the park. And I think it's wonderful, this swoop of things that's going on right now. Keep in mind, there are other monies besides just Main Street grants and CLG grants. There's a lot bigger money. I'm sure you guys are aware of the DOLA grants and things like that. The Colorado Get Outside GOCO grants, different things like that can work in tandem with certain projects that you have downtown. Gail, our coordinator, is fantastic at putting together projects and helping you. I'm good with buildings and actually helping you figure out, how to do green design. How does that save you money with a tax credit and all of those different things? And then town, you guys thinking about how do you make downtown more of a place that has it has a stickability factor, like you want to stick around longer and longer. How do you get folks that are visiting, particularly that would want to hang out longer during the day after an event, maybe want to relocate there? Developing those kinds of places downtown is something that we can try to help you with too. Next slide. This is a free document. You guys are members, as far as I could tell, for the Colorado Municipal League. So it's a nice resource. I would suggest putting this in your library, your little Main Street shelf that you're going to have, right, with the pictures of all the buildings and stuff. Next slide. Okay, and this is cool. This is actually when I was in Oklahoma, this is called a facade squad. This is something that somebody might not have had enough money, right, to take off this terrible cedar shingle mansard thing that was covering some beautiful windows back there that actually still functioned. They just dropped the ceiling in the 80s, and they didn't want people to see these ugly ducts. Well, they opened it all back up and got the natural daylight. They might have used some of the steel spiral ducts that looked a lot more attractive. Things do happen to buildings, and often, things get added on top of each other. And before you know it, you've ended up with being in this little tiny box with not much ceiling. The walls are covered with 1980s paneling and everything else. And you just need to sometimes take a step back and think about what it was, not what it could be. Like, let's think backwards sometimes. And I love doing educational presentations like this. It's really up to the town though, and it's up to your Main Street organization and historians, really to get the word out to folks that don't know much about preservation, and that you guys celebrate that. I mean, you can do all kinds of fun things. You can have, a tour, historic walking tour, explaining some interesting facts and stories about the buildings. And there's just so many ways you can go with this, especially in a town as rich with history as you guys. Okay, next slide. So that's pretty much it. And that's my information there. You can contact me anytime you want if anything's needed, and I'm glad to assist. And we're really glad you're in the Main Street program.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Larry. That was such a great overview of these best practices. And now we will hand it over to Shay.
Awesome. Thanks, Larry. Really makes me miss Main Street. So I was just going to talk a little bit about the land use code update and really specifically dig in on how it relates to historic preservation. So kind of what we're doing in that topic as part of the larger land use code update project. If you haven't already heard, the town has hired us, which is Clarion, and then myself from Urban Rural Continuum to update the land use code. We kicked that off in October of 2023 and plan to finish at near the end of the year this year. Some of the project goals on the next slide talk about kind of big picture goals, and Lucy did hit on these a bit. This is really a follow-up step to the Compass Master Plan. So after you do a master plan, it's really a best practice to update your land use code so that you can align the vision of the plan with all of your rules and regulations. So that's a big effort being made here. Also trying to kind of simplify, clarify, address those issues that Lucy brought up with the code. Also trying to reorganize and make sure it's a clear and consistent structure. So like procedures will all be in one place, use standards will all be in one place. And overall, one of the major goals is just to make it more user friendly. So staff has an easier time using it, the public has an easier time using it. And of course, anybody trying to build, develop can easily find what they need. And there's not like things hidden in places that people didn't realize it. That causes a lot of frustration. So trying to make it really user friendly for all. On the next slide, I've just shared the project website. You can learn more on that website. There's a link to it also on the town's homepage. You can sign up for project updates, review draft documents. We are asking for little bits of feedback there if that's how you prefer to do feedback. And then there's just other key information. So do go to that if you want to learn more about the land use code process. On the next slide, there is a quick outline of the land use code update. So it's organized in 11 articles. Those are listed on here. And historic preservation is mostly addressed in the 4 bold articles. So I will talk about those in detail a little bit more. And just as kind of a status or timing update, so far we have drafted almost all of the code, but that's really kind of on our internal side so far. We've done it in 2 parts. So the first part is actually published and public and on the project website. And we've been reviewing that with the stakeholder group in detail, having some meetings about different topics and really trying to hone in on some of those details. The second half has been reviewed by staff, and that will be published on Monday, actually, for the stakeholder group's detailed review, and then also on the website again. There will be a full public draft in June for this project. So again, I'm just going to go over these 4 articles that include historic preservation. So on the next slide, I talk about Article 2, the zoning districts. So this article will include all of the town's zoning districts, but specifically related to historic preservation, this will include the historic district overlay. The outline of that overlay district is in the blue blue box on the slide. I don't need to go over it, but it's there in case you're curious. We've done a few things like added a purpose. We've incorporated the required code language to become a CLG, which, as Larry mentioned, the town is working toward becoming. And we also used a template that Larry talked about. So hopefully we'll hit the mark with that and kind of check that box for the town to have a really good and strong ordinance for moving forward with that program. We've added some details, clarified some language, stuff that, staff has trouble with or stuff that people have asked about in the community, and it's kind of up to interpretation. We've also clarified the design standards. So design standards are kind of your minimum requirements. And we've addressed things like building setback or footprints, facade treatments, some basic architectural elements, ground floor commercial versus residential requirements. So Larry kind of touched on that. You guys actually already have some regulations about that. It just wasn't perfectly clear. So the idea moving forward is, commercial on the main drag would be required in kind of the front of the building. And then we're kind of talking about maybe the back and upstairs is okay for residential, or is it just upstairs? In addition, we've converted the builder's handbook into design guidelines that apply just to this historic district overlay. So this was actually requested by the Historic Review Committee and the board. And the idea is that guidelines kind of go they're suggestions that go beyond the minimum to improve the quality of a project. So just this week, Lucy sent out some examples to the Historic Review Committee and Historical Society to start talking about those guidelines. So Larry will be sure to look at Sydney, Nebraska, since that was one that you liked. And then the last kind of item in the zoning district category is that we actually removed the architectural review overlay. And I will explain that in the next slide, which talks about Article 6. So these are site development standards. Generally, this article includes a lot of other information, but specifically in relation to historic preservation, it talks about, we're adding some simple site and building design standards. This is a replacement of the architectural review overlay. There was some unpredictable language in the current rules that we were trying to get rid of and make really clear and standard. And generally, these site development standards are going to have 3 sections. So one section that applies to all development in town, one that's going to apply to residential, and another section that's going to apply to mixed use and non-residential. We heard a lot from the community actually about new development really needing to fit in with the existing character. People love and appreciate Silverton's character and don't want that totally ruined. So this section is offering things like contextual setbacks. So we're not just saying your setback has to be X feet, but hey, based on what's around you, you have to kind of meet an average of that. Talking about roof shapes, building materials, and topics like that. This is generally the section that we're talking about, those infill standards that Larry kind of mentioned and said are really important. So overall, these site development standards would apply to the whole town, but really help with development fitting in with the current character that the town has. Next slide talks about Article 8. So that is administration and procedures. This is where things like the Planning Commission and the Historic Review Committee and other decision-making bodies are described, kind of in detail, how they function, how they work, which is the same thing, how they're comprised, when they meet, those kinds of guidelines or rules. And then it talks about, so we cleaned all that up. So we added all of those decision-making bodies and tried to make them really uniform. So we are very clear about what does and doesn't apply and who can serve on what committees and how the terms work. We also are working on modifying the historic overlay district review to be administrative unless there's a request for a special exemption, which would then be reviewed by the Historic Review Committee. So that idea that I think Lucy touched on, that maybe there would be separate processes for minor projects or major projects. So we define those and say what qualifies as minor. You know, if there's a side elevation change that you really can't see from the public street, but you can kind of see, maybe that gets approved administratively. They can follow the standards. They can always call it up if it looks a little iffy. And then major applications would have to go through this process. That's a really helpful thing to help developers know what to expect and do their job well. On the next slide, this is the last article. It's Article 11, which is just definitions and measurements. So all the definitions related to historic preservation will be in this one section, along with all other definitions related to the code. So as you look for any terms, you go to Article 11 to find those. And on the next slide is our contact info. This is kind of the main team doing your land use code update. We're happy to answer any questions, concerns, talk about anything, and happy to answer any questions. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shay and Larry. This was an awesome learning session on historic preservation. So what's next? Our final learning session will be on April 24th on housing and zoning. And we will begin community engagement on our land use code in May. So thank you everyone for participating, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.